Okay, so good evening, everyone. Nice to see everyone here. And it is 6:01, so we will call the meeting to order. And Liz Sayre is going to take the minutes for us, which is great. Thank you so much, Liz. And Erin Jibner is going to be our timekeeper. And so our first order of business is public comment. And we've been working on a protocol that is consistent that we use at every every meeting, and we haven't yet landed on the language for that, but we have a protocol that we think is pretty good, and it's not very different from ones we've used before, but I'd like to just take a moment to read it, and then in future meetings we will, or I'm going to hit some of the highlights. It will be linked to the meeting minutes, but it is also linked to my chair notes in the agenda. But I'll just hit a couple of highlights. But the first thing I want to say off the bat is that we are always so grateful to have community participation in what's happening in our schools. And there are lots of ways we try to do that. And one of the ways is through public comment, but it is not the only way. And we continue to think of ways to invite our community to participate in events and engagement opportunities beyond public comment. But this is a period set aside specifically for you to share with us what's on your mind. So some of the highlights, and these are really designed so that we can both hear from you, but also ensure that we can also take care of the business we have set aside for us today. And also to do that in a way that abides by certain considerations that are really important to being a well-functioning community on board. So logistically, we invite folks to speak to us for a 2-minute time period. And if we have a large number of folks, we will have people sign up on a speakers list. And I don't know if anyone that is here has done that. So we'll refer to that list if folks have, and then also call on people online. One thing we're doing, which we're going to do in the future, is we have 2 public comment sessions. The first is at the beginning of the meeting, and the second is at the end. What we're going to try is to have the first public comment component be for items that are already on the agenda, so that we can be sure that those will be, that folks can give us input before we speak to those items as a board. So, and then the second public comment will be for items that are not on the agenda. We're just sharing this evening, so it's fine if you are not prepared to speak in that order. But that's something that we're going to strive for. It's also really important to us that we ensure that we are not violating the privacy of or other rights of students or school employees, that we will not engage with comments that are disrespectful, discourteous, or otherwise derogatory or demeaning, and that we will not engage with comments that don't comply with our policy on complaints. I think those are the key highlights. Anything from my policy and governance folks that you want to add, or Erin,
Just in the future, as part of our growing understanding of public comment and getting back to community members, I'll be capturing some of the items that are spoken about and if public need other resources or further comment from us from the board, then someone from the board will reach out directly to you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so we'll start with folks in the room. Is there anyone here who has a public comment or who would like to speak with us?
This has to be about what's on the agenda.
Well, because this is the first time we're letting folks know about that, then we've said that it's okay if you're going to speak to something not to the agenda. We do ask that you share your name, first and last name for the minutes, and the town that you reside in. And remember, you have 2 minutes.
Pamela Jennings, Bristol. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're here tonight because,
Before we begin, I just want to remind you about confidentiality.
oh yeah,
privacy.
yep,
Thank you.
not a problem. There seems to be a new enrollment in our school in Robinson. And that enrollment is an 11-year-old in 5th grade that committed murder, cold-blooded murder. In Waltham, I'm sure you all heard it on the news. That child was bragging at Virgin's Elementary that he took care of that bitch. First and foremost, this is still under investigation. He is still under investigation for murder. This is not any way safe for our children or staff at Robinson School. Not anyway. And he's in the picture. You'll see him. We all at Robinson are at risk of a terrible tragedy happening. This child should not be in a public school. Think about it. If Virgins didn't let him go to school there, why are we letting him go to school in Starksboro? It's not okay. This child's father, who he lives with, and
I
his
think
mother.
I'd like to look to the board for your feelings on this, but to me, I think we're veering on more information about a particular student than we are
Okay,
comfortable hearing. If you would like to just keep the focus on your concerns and
My
not on any
concern-
information about the particular student, we would appreciate it.
my concern with this student is that he could go off on any minute, any second. Anybody in our school is in deep danger with him. He should not be there. I don't care if it's staff or students. They're all facing a terrible tragedy to happen here. This child should not be in our school.
Thank
That's
you.
all I can say to you.
Thank you.
You have his picture, you have eyewitness statements to the murder. You have his Michelle, the lady that got killed, you have her brother's statement also. He is a danger to our school. And I'd appreciate it if you would all take this into executive session tonight, talk about it, and remove that child from our school.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone else here that would like to speak?
Speak, speak, speak.
Okay, moving to folks online, I see Herb Olson's hand raised. Herb, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I have a question about when to offer a comment. I was looking at the protocol, and the first comment period is for items on the agenda. I may or may not have a comment to make around the school budget, but I really won't know until I hear it and listen to the budget presentation. So my question, if I'm
Feel
not
free to go
able
ahead
to
and-
make a comment at the end, I'll try to make it now. Not listening, of course, I haven't listened to the presentation.
So I think,
it's a question.
yeah, so if I could answer your question, and then if you have a comment, we'll start the clock again for you, Herb. What I think we're trying to do is give folks an opportunity before we speak to an item on the agenda to share their thoughts so that we're keeping that in our minds when we get to that item.
Yeah.
But if you hear that, if you're not ready to speak now, and then at the end of the public comment period, you want to address something that was previously, happened earlier in the meeting, that's fine as well. So I hope that helps to clarify. And this is still something we are trying to work through, but for tonight, I would say feel free to share now or at the public comment period at the end.
Well, okay. I think I understand the intent here, and it's not it's a reasonable intent. I appreciate that, Krista. My concern has been, and again, I don't know whether the budget presentation will touch on this. My concern has been that there are significant savings that were identified by the Levinson report a couple of years ago. And to my knowledge, I don't think any of those savings have been built into the budget for this next fiscal year. And I think they really should, especially I've heard members concerned about losing teachers because of the cutoff of federal funds. We've heard achievement gaps, in terms of students who are lower income. These are savings that could really benefit education, the education of our students. And again, I don't know whether it will be mentioned in the budget presentation, but even if it's not, I urge the board to look at that report again. And I mean, I've I've counted about $3.2 million. That's a lot of money. I'm not saying that it's all potential savings. I'm sure there are difficulties, and I'm sure there are internal disagreements in the administration, teachers, principals over what savings to actually pursue. But this seems to be the time to take a look at it, because otherwise it sounds to me like cuts are going to be made that will be detrimental to our students. Thanks a lot, Krista.
Thank you, Herb. Is there anyone else online who has a public comment? And anyone else here? Okay, if you could say your name and the town you reside in.
Okay. My name is Lisa Ward and I reside in Starksboro. And so exceedingly uncomfortable in this kind of a situation, but I'm here because I also feel pretty strongly about the situation that's going on in Robinson with the child who's in our school. Because I have a son who's in that same class. And as a parent, when I found out that he was there, I wanted to tell my son, like, hey, stay away from him, like, I don't know if he's safe. I don't know anything about this child and why he made that choice to do what he did and what that says about his mental capacity. And then as a parent, I also didn't want to tell him because I want to protect him from the scary things in the world. And I just find that I feel like it's a very unfair situation for us to be in. And I have no idea what anybody is capable of doing in this situation. I don't know if you can kick him out. I don't know who has the ability to make these choices. But I do feel passionately about the fact that, like, I think about a couple of years back, there was another boy in my other son's class. And he was having trouble and being kind of a bully. And I remember my advice to him at that time was, sometimes the safest place is at school, and try to be kind to him. And then that boy came to Mausd and kicked someone in the head with a steel-toed boot. I'm glad that wasn't my son that he kicked. So that immediately came to my head when I heard this, because I was going to give that same advice to my son who's in this class. And then I thought, what if he befriends him? Because this one is kind-hearted and he will see the good in everybody. And this boy is being good from what I understand. You know, it doesn't sound like he's a one of the things my son did say something to me about him, saying maybe he will grow up to be a bully in Mausd, based on his interaction with him. That's something to think about. That was before he knew anything, but as you can imagine, that kids talk. These kids I did not say anything to my son about it. I mulled it over. I didn't tell him. I told him to trust his gut. That was my advice. But I just think it's definitely something to discuss. It's putting parents in a position that's uncomfortable. It's putting our children in a position that's uncomfortable. We're having to make decisions that are just really hard. And I know that's life, but just please weigh that when you think about this.
Thank you. Karen Harris, if you'd like to unmute and tell us your, well, we know your name is Karen Harris, but the town you reside in, or if it's not, that's not your name, let us know your name.
Yeah, I'm here standing in, kind of solidarity with my, my kid who also is in school with this individual. He plays basketball with him every day, and he has somewhat, I wouldn't say he calls him his friend, but he feels like if he didn't interact with him, he would have no other people to interact with. So he feels a sense of obligation. So it's a daily interaction, and they play basketball together. And I just simply asked about this person's character, and he said he gets angry and it makes him uncomfortable. So I'm here to speak to that piece. Someone with, I don't know the story because it's sealed. It's kind of not accessible to us, which is also concerning to me because I don't know how to make judgment on the situation, but I don't feel comfortable with that report, knowing that there's something, there is a story there. And I don't know how, as parents, we are going to be appeased or put at ease. I understand this person needs he needs some sort of protection or privacy. But what about the needs of us to feel like we're being assured that there's something in place that is being addressed with this kid? I mean, obviously, whatever the scenario is, there is going to be mental health concerns around this issue. And do we get to be reassured that there's things in place for this child? There's a structure around it of some sort. I feel like we need something if we're sending our kids daily. I think any parent would want some reassurance that's above a generic response that could just be any situation, any day. This is very unique, and I think we're deserving of something that's a little bit more tailored to the situation. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands online. Anyone else like to speak?
It's at the very top.
That was Karen who just spoke.
No way.
That just says her name again and that her hand is, yeah. Okay, thank you. So Adora's here. Is this an opportunity? I'm most interested. She is here to provide support. I don't know what that looks like.
Victoria, do you have thoughts you'd like to share or not at this time?
Sure. Yeah. Want me to stand up? What do you want me to do? Stand up.
Sure.
Okay.
Can you just introduce yourself for the folks that are?
Fraser, I'm the principal of Robinson Elementary School in Starksboro. Is there any way to look at, I don't know.
This is the camera here, so.
Hi, everyone. So I hear concerns expressed about safety issues at Robinson. I'm not gonna talk about individual students. I would caution people about misinformation that's being circulated through the community. And I would also like to speak to some of the safety measures that we do use at school. The safety situation in any elementary school is dynamic. It changes day to day, depending on who's calm, who's elevated for a variety of reasons, what's going on in the community and the world. All those things impact elementary schools. And so we are trained to adapt to those circumstances constantly. So some of the things we do at Robinson to ensure the safety of our students and our staff we have ongoing relationships with a number of community partners. That includes 2 police forces. It includes the counseling service of Addison County, with whom we contract for a full-time counselor at our school, who works in our school. We also have many community partners related to making sure our kids have food and clothing and medical care, all kinds of things. So students present themselves with different needs in our school. We have, as of Monday, we'll have 101 students. We got into the triple digits. Every one of those students has different needs, and we're constantly responding and flexing to them. So regardless of who shows up, we assess the needs of those students. In the vast majority of cases, we can meet those needs, and we do so, and we are doing so. So I have no concerns about my 101 students. I have no concerns that there are safety issues, that any of our students are dangerous within the school building. I don't believe that to be the case. I've had a long career, and I have encountered students that I felt to be a danger in school buildings. It's been a while, and I don't feel that way right now. I just want you to know that we plan for all kinds of safety measures in school. We have alarms, we have cameras, we have drills, we have meetings every week about the needs of each classroom and certain individual students. And all of those things are designed to ensure our ongoing safety. It's not a static system that is kind of a blunt instrument and then people come in and do all kinds of stuff and the system can't flex. That's not how it's built. So elementary schools are some of the safest places in our society because of all those things. It's literally more dangerous to walk down Church Street than it is to walk around in Robinson Elementary School. In fact, it's probably more dangerous to walk around the grocery store than an elementary school because of all the safety measures we have in place. Every adult in an elementary school is trained to watch, to listen, to respond to student needs, to help kids be calm and happy. All of those things we're trained to do, and we do it every minute that a student is in the building. And you can feel when the last student has left the building, that level of alert, you can feel the staff relax. We take that responsibility seriously. So I think we're doing it well. I'm very safe and comfortable. I feel very safe and comfortable in my school. I think that's been the case every day this year. And I expect it to be the case going forward.
Thank you.
Any questions? Or do you want me to take questions or just leave?
No, I think if you do have a public comment, just remember, you're commenting to the board, you're not commenting in response to
Oh, I had a
Adora.
question.
Oh, okay. Are you,
Is that okay?
sure.
Okay, sure. Do you have a metal detector? In the school?
Yeah.
No.
And rest. That's all I need to know.
Okay. We're not going to get into a back and forth with Adora.
I'm not doing
Miss
it back and
Jennings
forth. I
and-
have a question.
Okay, so we're not also not answering. Do you have a question for Ms. Fraser?
Yes,
Okay.
do we, search knapsacks? Do we search jackets? Do we search pants pockets? If you didn't want to single one child out to do that, do the whole grade, do the whole class. Do the whole 5th grade class. Because he is in the 5th grade class.
Thank you. Thank you, Adora. Appreciate you being here. Thank you to the folks that shared their comments and thoughts. Okay, name,
I'm Victoria Purrington. Yeah, I wasn't gonna say anything either, but, our adopted grandson goes to Robinson. And I have heard stuff on all sides of the situation. And all I have to say is I feel very comfortable with our child going to that school every day. I'd like to think I'm pretty intricately involved with the school. And if people have questions or concerns or fears, to get involved, to go in and ask questions. That's the first thing I did when I found out. You know, the child was there for several weeks before we even had it pointed out to us. They kept our kids safe in those weeks. Why would that change just because we now know about it? So to Adora and the school and everybody, I send my kid every day, whether there's someone there that's been accused of murder or not. When we put our kids in public school, we trust them to keep our children safe, and that's what I have done, and that's what I'll continue to do.
thank you. Okay, we're going to move on now. Thank you. And I just ask, there is confidential information that is in this information that we received. So I just ask that you turn it over and we'll collect it at the end. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to our next item, which is to approve the agenda. And I do have one addition, which is to add an executive session at the end of the meeting for a grievance, and that's going to be under VSA 3BA1D. Is there any other additions or amendments or questions about the agenda? Bailey,
Well, we're just realizing we can't open the links on the agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, for some reason, the links on there.
are you looking at the PDF version?
I tried going to the website as well, and they're not clickable, if you will.
How about I send you the Google Doc version?
Found that if I download the
Yeah, you
file,
tried
then you
downloading.
can click on it. Is the other way to do that.
Uh-huh.
I ran into the same issue, but
It's not doing it online, but you can do when you download.
Okay,
Yeah.
so for folks that are not getting it via email from me on the school board list, if you want access to the links, it sounds like if you download the PDF, the link should work. Thank you.
is
Okay.
that new? I'm just curious in terms
I
of
haven't
problem
run it.
solving.
Yeah.
I haven't run
Has
into
it been an
this
issue
before.
This is the
before?
first time I've had it.
Okay, if nothing else, then I take a motion to, I would accept a motion to approve. I'll take a motion.
So moved, Aaron.
I'll second.
Right. Okay, all those in favor of approving the agenda with the addition of a grievance executive session, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, moving on to our consent agenda. Need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
I'll second.
All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, moving down to executive limitations monitoring. We have two monitoring reports. The first is global executive constraint. So we can start there. So if folks want to open your link. So before we get into the questions, does anybody, the questions for the report, does anybody have any questions, comments, thoughts for Patrick on that?
I thought it was a particularly thorough report, so I appreciate that. There's a lot of information embedded in this with a lot of evidence to support the conclusion, so.
Anything
Oh.
else?
I was just gonna, is this someplace that an advisory council might fit into? As part of, as moving forward? with
Yeah,
that?
could be. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it at the time of drafting this. It was kind of happening simultaneously.
Right. I wondered about.
It's
the
worth
time.
thinking about, yeah.
Any other comments, thoughts, questions? Thank you, Patrick, for doing that. And so, is there sufficient evidence to indicate compliance with the whole policy? Yes or no? Thumbs up if it's yes. And is there any reason to doubt the integrity of the information presented? That would be a thumbs down. Are we all comfortable in the integrity?
Yeah.
Okay, there's no non-compliance. And is there anything after reviewing the report that would make you consider whether the policy itself should be amended or revised? Okay. So then I need a motion. Oh,
Yes, you-
I needed a motion earlier, didn't I?
it's all right, it still works.
Okay, good. All right, can we have a motion to approve the report?
So moved.
Kristen, and a second?
I'll second.
Justin, all those in favor of approving monitoring report 2.0, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Next is monitoring report 2.6, asset protection.
Want to start with a motion or do we have?
Yes, please. Thank you. You would think I would have learned. May I have a motion? Thank you. And a second.
I'll second.
Okay, so, Aaron. Kristen, I'm just looking. Oh, Liz is still there. Okay, great. All right, questions or thoughts for Patrick on this report? Okay, so looking at our worksheet, is there sufficient evidence to indicate compliance? Oh. I'm realizing the other questions are probably the ones. There's these questions. Based on the information,
I do find an interpretation.
I was doing these ones.
They're all good questions.
Okay. Let's try these questions. Based on the information provided, do you find that the interpretation is reasonable? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, based on the information provided, does the data demonstrate accomplishment of this interpretation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And is there anything in reviewing the monitoring report that makes you consider whether the policy itself should be amended or? All those in favor of approving monitoring report 2.6 asset protection, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, moving on, we have the financial report. Thank you, Floyd. And your team. Does anyone have any questions or about this report? Hearing none. We will move on. Okay, we also have the superintendent's report. That is linked. Any questions about the superintendent's report? Looks like it was from Moncton and Beeman and Mount Abe.
This is a compilation of the last months. Right.
Right.
Okay. All right, moving on. We have an update on the advisory council. Patrick?
Yeah, so the advisory council is formed. It is 17 members plus myself, so 18 total, representing all the schools, a range of positions, various perspectives. The first meeting, as often is the case with first meetings, a lot of norm setting, introductions, Katrina's favorite icebreaker. As you all have experienced, she's a fan of the icebreakers. And there's a effort underway right now to create a message from that first meeting that would be shared more broadly. So I'm cautious to share more out of confidence from that group right now. But I think I can say the air was, I think, really collaborative. I think there's a lot of energy around some of the visioning kind of conversations that we had. And I think folks left energized. So I'm looking forward to our next meeting. And I'll share that communication when that's ready. It should come out probably next week.
Awesome.
Any questions for Patrick or comments? Okay. All right, we have an update on Data Day. So
And
can you remind us again what that is and how often it happens?
Katrina's going to take this one.
Great, Katrina.
So
Do you want to
back
come on up?
in September, I shared with you our, in the superintendent's report, a little assessment 101. And linked in that page was our local comprehensive assessment plan. And it kind of shows the ways in which we screen students in literacy, math, and in some of our social emotional learning benchmarks. So every year, because those are 3 times a year, we have what we call Fonzie Data Day. And we spend a day, about 6 hours, working together as a team of close to 30. We were a little shy this year, this time around. But it's the whole admin team. It's folks who are instructional leaders in our district, data folks, folks from our evaluation team. We all come together and this particular time, we had 416 slides worth of data. So we are not lacking data, and that's why, assessment 101 is bigger than 101, right? So we highlight a lot of things within the data for the group so that we can talk about celebrations, some things that we are seeing that look great, particularly in terms of the fact that this can be in a lot of grade levels benchmark data, right? This is data that's expected to grow and get better each time through, but also nice to see cohort data. So kids who were performing in a certain way as second graders there are places we can see some positive growth as third graders, which is exciting. We spend a lot of time in small groups, school level teams, so that principals and their systems coaches can look more deeply at specific measures in the data and take back an action or a protocol back to the school so that they can use staff meeting time to unpack their data a little bit more deeply. That is the nutshell that I could possibly do for 416 slides in a 6-hour day.
Can you share some highlights and some areas for continued growth?
I mean, for me, because we break down into small groups and really spend time in a particular school.
Mhm.
So I was with Mausd the whole day, and we had a lot to celebrate. There was a lot of growth, particularly in the panorama data, which we don't report out on to you yet in the ENS monitoring report because it's relatively new to us. But we are hoping to explain some of the SEL work that we're going to do in the spring. I think we're hoping to come, like we're going to be doing a math presentation next month. In April, we'd like to do a social emotional learning report so we can explain to you that assessment a little bit better. Because you don't see that one yet in the ENS monitoring report, but you will. So it's a lot about sense of belonging in the school, an identified trusted adult that is either in your school or outside of your school. A lot of those scores were a lot higher than they've been before for middle and high school. And that felt really good.
And those are self-assessed at the middle and high school level. So students reporting, that's how they felt.
So just a quick question on that. Was there anything in particular that jumped out as to like what it was that elevated that level that, from what it was to what it has become?
Yeah, I mean, Shannon was in our group and I know that she then replicated the protocol with the staff at her following staff meeting, which I think was just on Wednesday. I wasn't there. But yeah, I think they're really thinking a lot about more that they're doing an advisory with that sense of belonging piece. I think in the middle school, I think some of the instructional blocks are longer this year than they've been before, wondering if that's making kids feel safer, less transition. We're feeling pretty good right now about our mentoring program. We've got 32 matches here at Mausd. That's a record for us since the past few years. So those are just some. I'm really only speaking specifically to Mausd right now because that's where I really dug in deep. I don't know if you have anything from the schools you sat with.
The focus was more on academic supports than I'm thinking about. I sat in with Moncton and looking at their data, and there were some takeaways from a math instructional standpoint that Mike brought back to the school and is working with teachers on.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, any other questions or thoughts about the other? All right, we now have a monitoring report 3.4, which I think was sent under separate cover. Find it. So thanks to Sarah for working on this. Want to say anything about it, Sarah, or just invite folks? Nope. Okay. Anybody have, I guess I'll just say that, in the reading, hopefully you see where we're referencing things that we've talked about before as far as ways to expand on the monitoring and evaluation piece. So that's would be looking ahead to the next year to build those things in place or to start to expand on that process. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
Motion to approve.
And again, thank you. I forgot to mention. Thank you, Steve. And can we have a second? Barb. Thank you, Barb. Okay. So let's see, here are the questions. Based on the information provided, do you find that the interpretation is reasonable? Yes or no? See thumbs and nods. Great. Based on the information provided, does the data demonstrate accomplishment of this interpretation? Yes or no? Great. Having reviewed the report, does anything you've learned make you consider whether the policy itself should be amended or revised? Okay, all those in favor of accepting monitoring report 3.4, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Right, moving right along, and I'll turn this over, I think, to Steve to walk us through. Thank you so much to Steve and Aaron and Katrina, who've been doing some really key and really long overdue housekeeping on our policies and making sure they're current with what's mandated and also just in our own policies, really doing a lot of work to get them up to speed. So, so we'll, I think, be seeing more policies that we need to approve based on some changes as we go along, but here's a good list. Do you want to hit the highlights for us?
Sure.
Oh, may I have a motion to approve for posting these policies?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second. Bailey. Okay. Steve.
All right, so the majority of these are required policies, starting with mostly the C series here. They're required under the VSBA model policies. VSBA looks at the state law and says, and discusses these with the AOE and comes up with a policy that addresses state law. And so that's why these policies are considered required. So all the C series policies you see here are required. And we have not adopted them yet. So this was to do some housekeeping and get those into our policy library. And for the most part, they are only modified so that they obviously are identifiable as our policy. We didn't really change any of the language from what VSBA recommended unless there was something that they required that we insert into the policy to handle our own particular circumstances. So that's the C series. The A4 governance process. There was an A4.8 ownership linkage policy that was adopted some time back, and it had never really been sort of organized under the A4 series. A4, if you open up A4, it was originally A4.0 all the way to A4.7. And then at some point, we adopted a separate A4.8 policy that was somewhere else. And we just worked to combine that so that A4.8 is now directly under the other policies when you open that document. There was also some conflicting language in A4 under board member conduct with the A5 policy, board member conflict of interest. So we just sorted that out and moved some things around so that A4 references A5 where it has to, and it we deleted some duplicate language out of A5. So that's just another little piece of housekeeping. A6, one thing that we noticed that we were sort of missing in terms of how we were going to execute our work under the Policy and Governance Committee was how do we actually adopt and administer our school board policies? And lo and behold, there really wasn't anything that told us how to do that. The VSBA had a recommended policy for doing it, but we had not adopted it. So we took a look through it and modified it slightly for our purposes, described how our PGC policy, our committee will interface in that process, and also set up some distinctions between policies that are policies typically have some type of administrative responsibilities outlined in them. And that responsibility is typically to develop a protocol or a procedure to support that policy. And those procedures are separately listed on our website. Those are created and house kept by Patrick and his staff. And those are separate from some of the tools that the board needs to use to complete board work. So the board has some things like the ownership linkage plan that you might have seen, draft ownership linkage plan. That's not a policy. It's a we're calling it a protocol. And that we're using the word protocol so that we keep it separate from procedure. So in this A6 document, we provide a definition of what a policy is, a board policy, what a board protocol is, where we're developing some kind of tool that goes along with the policy so the board can actually enact that, whatever the goal of that policy is, and then defining again what an administrative procedure is. So that's what the what's basically encompassed in the A6 policy. We have a whole slew of additional policies that are going to be coming out in the near future. A lot of them basically are from the fact that most of our policies were originally authored in 2018 when we merged, and they've not been modified since. And the VSBA has had one, if not more, updates to those policies in the meantime. So we're going through them one at a time and just cross-checking what's different between them. And you'll see those come out in the next couple of meetings.
And Steve, just to remind us, so what we're gonna move now is that we are approving it to be posted, and so then in December, we'll see it in the
Yeah, the process is
agenda.
essentially, and the language, we probably need to clean up the language here a little bit. I think the first round is going to be warned instead of posted. And then the second round will be posted.
Okay, so what we're doing,
Sorry, the second round will be adopted.
do we need to amend the motion then?
Well, I think for now, I think it's fine because we haven't actually adopted these yet. So
Okay.
A6 actually talks about that process. And but there will be 2 rounds of review.
Okay.
So the first round is the one you're seeing today. That's why some of these, there's draft comments and highlights and stuff on them. because it's the first time you've seen them, it gives you a chance if you'd like to dive into them and, see if you want to do any wordsmithing on anything that strikes you as needs to be changed. We've done that as a committee, hopefully for you, so that, again, we're sharing the workload here. But if anybody wants to dive into these, this is your chance. And then if we receive any comments between now and the next time, then we would note that in our next meeting when we present them for adoption.
So would it go on the consent agenda in the next meeting or not?
It probably should not go on the consent agenda.
Okay.
Well, that's a good question. I'm gonna mull that over. I mean, if we
Okay.
don't see any comments,
And it can,
then I would say, I wouldn't see why not.
okay. So, yeah,
If
so
we do see comments.
just giving
and
folks a
we
heads
wanna-
up that that's the process we're gonna be adopting, so, yeah.
We could work that out.
Yeah.
Depending on what the level of interest or level of feedback we get. from anybody.
Okay.
Put them on the consent agenda and then pull one if there's one that needs more.
That is true.
And you can always pull from the consent agenda.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so at this first look, does anyone have any, other than, again, gratitude?
I was gonna
Lots of
piggyback
good-
on
lots of
that.
Lots of
Yeah.
gratitude for
Yeah,
this
that's
work.
huge. That is a lot of heavy lifting, so.
And
Many
it's so
thanks.
important because it'll come up and we'll be like,
Yeah.
oh, wait. But besides that, if there's nothing else,
I had maybe just a broad question.
Yes,
Trying to wrap my head around this sort of new, subcommittees and then bringing
Yes.
that back to board work.
yeah,
Which is kind of a generic question of like, how much do we really want from the board in terms of feedback at this moment?
Mm.
Right? I mean, on some level, I love that we're delegating this work and it's great. On another level, if we want meaningful feedback, my suggestion would be we'd have to roll these out slower,
mhm,
right? Getting 7 policies as part of a single agenda that I haven't seen
mhm.
or I haven't seen much. And really thinking that I'm gonna have the time to give you meaningful feedback relative to what you've been doing for the last weeks on this doesn't feel like a good match.
Mhm.
And so if we're okay with not looking for a lot of feedback, this seems great. If we think there needs to be more give and take, I would suggest these come out slower so that we could actually mull them over in a way that's actually reasonable. Maybe everybody else read them really detailed, but I saw this agenda with 7 more things and I start to wonder how I can possibly give it that level if that's what we really need. Or if I need to.
Yeah, and having 2 rounds is an attempt to address that to some extent. There's a lot of, this has not been done in a long time. This is some overdue housekeeping and it kind of needs to go through a sort of a more expedited lift to get it up to sort of ground zero, I would say. Any of these policies at any time can be commented on by anybody. We can get these cleaned up to the point where we think we're at least on the level playing field with the VSBA. And if anybody has any issues with any of them, they can simply send, anybody on the committee a note. And we can put it back on the agenda and work through it and add that, to our workload. So these documents are really live. And as at really any point during your board tenure, you can dive into them whenever you'd like. I just want to make that clear, it's not that as soon as we approve these, they disappear and you can never touch them again. So, but there is a lot of overdue cleanup, and it's very difficult to try to get everybody to focus on it. So,
Steve, would you say it's a fair statement that the required policies probably need less scrutiny? Because they're model policies from the VSBA, often close to verbatim, and they're required? I mean, reading for understanding, but in terms of critiquing.
yeah, I mean, the advice that I've heard is that you don't really want to monkey too much with the VSBA policies. Unless there's just something really out of whack. Because they've been vetted by the lawyers, and as soon as you start muddling with them, then you then have to try to keep up with the legal change. You're responsible for the legal ramifications of your modification in a more direct way than you might be with some other optional school policies. So
That's super helpful, and I was really actually just raising it almost for anything in general, like whether we come with finance subcommittee with information back, like to what extent do we want that to be something that it gets reworked, like just trying to get a sense of the board in general of how you balance those, and this is a very useful perspective, so
Yeah.
so thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I totally appreciate, having to bring these policies up to speed after 5 years. And so it's kind of an exception.
yeah,
But to Mike's broader point, I think the reason why we created the committees was to kind of share the work and to be able to do deeper dives. So I would think would be incumbent upon each of the committees that to identify specific things that they might really, want broader board input on.
yes,
I think that should be part of our job as committee members. If it's something that Mike and Sarah and I think that, we don't really feel real comfortable making a decision about this, let's talk to the governance people or the facilities people, or what have you.
yeah,
And
I
I
know
think
that,
that'll-
once we do get through this first round of cleanup, then really wouldn't expect to see a new policy come out in a giant lump with a bunch of other ones. You might get one every 2 or 3 board meetings, because the VSB had just recently come up with a new change, or we had discussed a policy even with the board, because I know we have a couple of policies that we don't want to proceed any further with until we get some board feedback on it. So I think the ones that we want you to concentrate on and the ones that are, and once we get through this first round, I think this won't look so onerous. The Career Center, which I'm on the board of, just went through the same exact thing. They were really behind on their policy book, and their policy committee did almost the same exact thing, through a giant lump of them at people at the same time. And since I already knew where this was coming from, I didn't really have an issue with it there, but I could see how people might.
To the general question, though, I think it's something we'll keep revisiting because committees are new to us. But I would also say, when in doubt, bring it to the board for more conversation, for sure. But thank you for raising that.
Thanks. You.
Okay, so we need to take a vote on whether we're going to move these along. So all those in favor of approving these policies with the suggested changes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. Our student representative from Community Council is on vacation, well deserved, so she does not want to be with us this evening. So we're going to just move on to the first review of the draft budget that is taking into consideration the guidance that we gave the administration last time to stay below the 10% in our new
5%.
10% in per pupil spending
10% increase.
to get the 5%. Yes. And it's gonna get as clear as mud every day. Every day is gonna be more and more muddy.
Yes.
Super. Yeah.
Hot off the presses, so I will share screen. Oh,
Sorry,
yeah, sorry,
folks.
folks.
Yeah.
Not
Feel
get
free to
that
come on
TV
over to the
operated.
side, or
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to.
You could try going on to the Zoom session, it might help.
And you could just make sure if you do that, you turn your computer volume off.
Yeah.
Okay, so a number of these slides are just what we saw last time. In particular, when we're talking about sort of the convergence of some of the challenges. So again, we have the ESSER funds, those federal relief funds are going away. In conjunction with changes to Act 127, affectionately known as the weighting study, that's sort of the biggest impact there. And this concept of enrollment decline is not going away. It looks a little different than it had in the past. but still has an impact. And they sort of converge on creating FY 25 and beyond. I mean, these will have impact for future years as well, which we'll talk about some tonight. So again, those three big buckets. I won't spend a lot of time on each of these slides again. We went over these last time, but I'm happy to pause at any point if somebody has more questions. So Act 127, as I said, is a weighting study. Essentially, it changed the way we try to account for the different costs to educate students with different needs. And because we're doing that without changing the pot of money in the state, it means redistributing the money that we have, which means more money goes in some places than it has historically, and less money goes to other places than it has historically. This kind of goes over what some of the weighting changes were. The net effect for us is we lost taxing capacity. So basically, the same spending with the same cost per pupil now has a higher tax rate without any changes from that point. Again, this kind of goes into some of the specific impact to us. It's about a 10-cent increase on the tax rate before we've done anything to it, simply from the changes to the weights. So that's essentially what I just described. This comes to Steve's question about the 5% or 10%. So the part of Act 127 stipulates that no community for 5 years, which is FY 25 through FY 29, will experience a homestead tax rate increase, so that's before CLA, of greater than 5%. So long as your cost per pupil does not exceed 10% increase. So those are sort of the two figures. As long as we stay under 10% per pupil, we're guaranteed to not experience more than a 5% increase in the tax rate for any of the next 5 years. As soon as we don't hit that, as soon as we don't take advantage of that 5% cap, it is no longer an option for us in subsequent years out through FY 29. Shifting to federal relief dollars, and this, I can pause there if there are questions. I know it's new.
Yeah, just a question, have you thought out the 5 years and what it's gonna look like? And
Sadly,
yeah, I mean,
I have some graphs that are in this presentation later
Okay,
that
all
we'll
right.
look at. Best projections, but a ballpark of what we will be looking at if we don't change our trajectory.
I had dinner last night with a friend of mine from South Burlington who's involved in the school system, and they're petrified about 2030,
Yep.
2029.
The cliff, the new cliff.
The new cliff, right?
Yeah. It's always fun to have a cliff to be paying attention to.
Patrick, I don't know if you're the right person, but can you minimize?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I did on my screen, but it didn't appear. There we go. I'll try to, sorry about that. Let me try to move that a little more. Okay. All right, so ESSER funds, again, these are our federal relief funds that came in multiple waves. MAUSD got a little over $4 million over the course of the last 3 years. And these are some of the things we use those funds for. In particular, these are the things that would be perceived as ongoing expenses, that when you use one-time funds to fund what would otherwise be ongoing expenses, when those one-time funds go away, you're left with either no longer continuing those expenses or building those into the budget. And as we talked about, the constraints of Act 127 make it challenging to absorb all those positions that we did fund with ESSER dollars. And it's ongoing work, it still is. I'll show you the sort of today's version of that ongoing work as we look to prioritize some of those positions and try to make sense of it all while staying within that target. So enrollment decline, we're actually seeing stabilization at the elementary level. In fact, there's a little bit of a tick up in this projection for FY 25. But we're losing at the secondary level, which is sort of what we've anticipated, right? We saw the decline at the elementary, and that decline is kind of working its way through the middle and high school now. The reason enrollment decline is still a challenge, even though we're seeing sort of a net stabilization or a tick up, is because the high school weights are greater than the elementary school weights. So the fact that we've stabilized at the elementary school is great, but the loss at the high school is sort of greater than the stabilization effect at the elementary. And we'll talk more about when we get into some of the slides and the projections about just sort of an idea of what we're projecting for enrollment decline. So some of the assumptions in the budget, when we start getting into some of the numbers, most of these are the same as last time. Last time we were assuming 15% increase in healthcare. Sadly, we were underestimating the healthcare increase. So 15.9 is the figure that came out just after the last sort of version of this that you saw. So that's what's built into the. And the only other change here, and this is pretty significant, and you'll see more about this impact later. This draft budget that you're seeing includes nearly all of the ESSER funded positions in it. So there has been concern about the loss of these positions that have been really valuable as we've been responding to student need. This budget has almost all of those positions in it. We'll talk more about the details of that.
So, Patrick, what was the healthcare number last time?
15% is what we had in here.
I heard this was actually 16 and a half.
Depending on the plan that you may be tied to,
Okay.
we have no teammates that are currently covered with that particularly more expensive plan.
That's the gold and the platinum. The gold CDHP is the most common plan choice, I think. Certainly for us, but I think.
So the
Across the
thought
state.
being that even if one or two move to that type of a plan going forward, the impact wouldn't push us to a 16.4, would be a 15.91, 15.905.
All right, so no real changes. Dora did mention the additional students at Robinson. They're accounted for here, at least in the projected FY25, but still the net is a little bit of a decrease there. So more or less the same story from an enrollment perspective, and therefore more or less the same story from an average class size perspective. These are within the class size guidelines, in some cases encroaching on the lower side. But from a staffing perspective, I think this budget has, I think, perhaps the right amount of classrooms. Just for reference again, the class size guidelines. And this is, so spent a little bit of time looking at the thought exchange results from September. We had students, staff, parents, and community members complete the survey. And this is sort of broad strokes, some of the themes that emerge, some of the top themes that emerge from each of the groups. I'll note that the day that the students did the survey in the auditorium was one of those 90-something degree days in September. So 45 of the top 50 thoughts from students were all get air conditioning at Mount 8.
ASAP.
ASAP, like today, I think was what they were looking for on that particular
All
day.
back then.
It was quite warm,
Yeah,
yes.
here in the summer.
But in addition to that, two of the other top themes were bathroom access and more breaks. So interesting. From the staff, SEL support was the number one, and then supportive environment for teachers, early intervention, teacher retention, and modern facilities. Modern facilities was a strong theme for parents and guardians, along with teacher retention, SEL support, and academics. And then teacher training, SEL support, teacher retention, and modern facilities for community. So kind of sifting through all of that, three things kind of jumped out to me, and that was SEL support, facilities improvements, and teacher retention. So I wanted to point out what in this budget would speak to those themes that emerged from that thought exchange in September. So from SEL support, this budget has all of these various supports that are really directly related to helping students with their social and emotional learning. I want to acknowledge that I would describe this as robust. In a school district of 1,200 students, to have the number of counselors we have, social workers, psychologists, clinicians, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is significant. We are absolutely investing heavily in supporting the social emotional learning students.
I'm not sure if this would be under this column, but, teaching, teaching the staff.
Like staff training?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Training for,
Yep, so that's so.
incentives that you might have, sorry, I lost my.
Yeah, so there is professional development money is available to teachers if they want to pursue their own, but we also have SEL coaches, so we lead in-house trainings as well at different times. So that's embedded as well. One thing I didn't mention here that I thought of when Katrina was talking before, our mentoring program, I would say is something that we can add here as an SEL support. And that is a very robust mentoring program as well. In terms of facilities improvements, so not necessarily in this budget, because this is really looking at general fund expenses, but we have some significant grant money going toward HVAC upgrades. That is both a combination of ESSER funds, but also an Efficiency Vermont grant that we have secured that's going to be doing the HVAC upgrades at Beaman this summer. So we actually have a lot of HVAC upgrades at Beaman and at Mount Eve this summer. Probably between $1 and $1.5 million worth of HVAC in those two places. Yeah. We have a robust construction services line, as we've talked about in prior budgets, that currently sits in this budget at about 2.3 million dollars. So that's great, and that's what we've been leaning on to make the improvements that we have, and that's part of what we'll lean on for the HVAC upgrades at Mount Abe, supplementing the ESSER funds. We have a healthy repairs and maintenance supplies line. We have the capital reserve fund that we use from time to time. We're in the very early stages of doing a comprehensive facilities assessment with Truex Collins, which is the architect firm that we've been using for a lot of our projects recently, which will give us some great information and help us be strategic about next steps, which could include a bond in the future, as we get a sense of what those needs are. Always fun to talk about going back out for that. It's still the smart way to do it. And it still has all the challenges it's had in the past.
In the state, just to add on the assessment, the statewide facilities assessment is, I think, hitting public now.
Yep.
So that's
and they acknowledge, if you dig a little deep into the links that I think I shared around, there's a cover letter that basically says, pay no attention to the costs of these projects that we're saying you might want to consider, because the costs are not even close to real.
In the statewide assessment.
In the statewide assessment. It basically gave them kind of a level playing field to compare all the schools in the state, but they're not really in tune with the real cost of construction.
And maybe this is part of that, but I thought I heard at the VSBA conference that the folks were feeling like the statewide assessment, like having this comprehensive assessment, was a more true assessment of the need, or more detailed or deeper, or, intensive. And so,
to put it in perspective, the comprehensive assessment we're talking about with Truex Collins, which is something they do with lots of different districts. I know Addison Central did something similar. It's several months of work. It's tens of thousands, maybe north of $100,000 just for MAUSD. This state assessment was conducted of all schools in the whole state in a year, a little less than a year. So like they couldn't have done what Truex is going to do for us for every school building in the whole state.
and I think the expectation was a little different, right?
Sure.
What we're looking for with Truex is, what do we need going forward? And what the state assessment is, what do we do if we replace what we have? Let's talk wall ventilators in a classroom. Well, that's just not what we're going to do. We're not going to put wall ventilators in the classrooms again as we move to upgrade and have a stronger HVAC structure. It's one little tiny piece.
But another example, one of the political challenges with the statewide assessment, when folks drill down by school, someone might look at the Beeman assessment and say, the state says the roof at Beeman needs to be redone and it can be done for $180,000. And we actually put it out to bid and it comes back at $1.2 million. And the community can say, you're trying to pull a fast one or something because your numbers are so different than what this statewide assessment says they should be. That's a political challenge that we'll have to navigate somehow. For however much people are tuned into these facility assessments, I don't really know how tuned in people are. Well, true. Nothing like a bond to get people tuned in. So I would say, again, we have a robust facilities budget. And I think we're doing great things to improve facilities, and we'll continue to do great things one way or another. From teacher retention, I feel like these are components in the budget that speak to retention of teachers. I think what we pay teachers has an impact on that. I think the SEL supports that we referenced before has an impact on providing that support. We have added classroom teachers in recent years. I think the level of increased administrative support has been welcomed. I think about our coaches, both the instructional coaches and our SEL coaches, in terms of helping teachers strengthen that universal instruction. We provide great health insurance, not unique to us in MAUSD, but I think in terms of keeping people in the profession, I think that's a draw. And we have, I think there are fewer and fewer districts that continue to provide 6 credits for continued education each year. So I think that's something that is advantageous to us from a retention standpoint. So just thought it would be important, we could associate dollars to all of these, but I think just even conceptually to know these are some of the things that are in this budget is helpful. Here's the numbers. So this budget that I'm sharing with you does not quite hit the target yet. It's at 10.36% increase per pupil, and the target was to stay under 10. As I mentioned, this budget does have all of the ESSER funded positions, with the exception being 6 utility EAs. All of the other supports are in here. The reason I was comfortable with, for tonight's purposes, being this $97,780 over, that's the actual dollar figure. We're less than $100,000 within the target, which in a $36 million budget is something, we can kind of massage that if we need to. We don't yet have the actual long-term weighted ADM from the state. We don't have the yield from the state. There's a lot of information we don't have from the state yet that could impact this anyway. So to do lots of additional hard work and have conversations with people about potentially not having jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, when we don't have that information yet, it could make the $100,000 over $300,000 over the target, or it could make us $100,000 under the target. So kind of here as a landing point felt like an okay place to be, knowing that we're, at least given what we know now, within striking distance of the target that has been set.
Patrick, so I know that if you go over the 10%, it triggers that review.
Correct.
Does that automatically mean if there is a review, you automatically will have to pay the tax, or not necessarily?
If the review says your spending is deemed acceptable or necessary, then you're still capped at 5%. And if they deem otherwise, then you're paying whatever it would be.
I mean, you don't want to play that game, but
bingo.
Right.
Because for us, it's 5% or 17%.
Right.
It's a huge gamble. And that's why the 10% target.
Opportunity to adjust the budget.
No, because by the time the review happens, it is likely that we're still trying to figure this out, but it is likely that the board has already adopted it and the taxpayers have already voted it in. And then they'll tell you after the fact what your tax rate is going to be.
Which they do anyway.
Right. But they do it for everybody in terms of the yield and all that stuff. So it's a bit of a game that I think all school districts in the state are learning to play. And sometimes it feels like the rules are changing in the middle of the game. So breaking this down, this is something that we've shown in different years, and I know the finance committee looked at something similar to this, and it's something that people have appreciated. So this just sort of breaks down that total spending by category. I suspect this looks similar to many districts. Well, I'll point out that the tiny yellow sliver at the top is food service. That's less than 1%. And you almost can't see it, but between the yellow and the light blue, there's a red sliver. That is our debt. Relative to a lot of other districts, I would say we have no debt, which is great in a way. But honestly, financially, our approach of carrying no debt and choosing to pay for things you'd pay for debt, mostly facilities, with actual dollars in a general fund, isn't the best financial move to make, because we're paying 5, 7, 9, 10% increase in construction service costs every year, instead of what would have been years ago with a bond, 2 or 3% increase on or interest on a loan. So it would actually make financial sense for us to trim that facilities, because that's where our construction services is, that 2.2 or $3 million, and grow the debt. Makes sense long-term financially to get to the same place in terms of facilities improvements. But I think when you look at these pieces and kind of put some of the pieces together, like instructional programming, special education instruction, instructional sport, athletics and support, athletics and co-curricular, you can see 70+% of this budget is really about direct services for students.
Patrick, how much did you say the comprehensive facilities assessment is going to be?
How much is the cost? Probably, I would say conservatively 100,000.
And that's coming out of this.
And that would come out of the construction services. Yeah. Well, it'll be coming out of the current budget. So this is FY25. We're talking at least a portion of the assessment will come out of FY24, which is what we're in now. And then if that crosses over into the next fiscal year, we may need to use some of the construction services line out of next year as well. So what you saw in a couple slides ago is an increase of $3 million, a little over $3 million. And I wanted to break that down for you a little bit. So salary increases is 341,000 of that. Health insurance and changes in health insurance plans, et cetera, is $638,000 for that increase. We added from the current budget 5% in construction services. Whenever we can, we want to try to add 5%. That's like on the low end of what we can expect costs to go up in that field. So that basically keeps us with the same relative money to continue to do the work. $1 million is added here for anticipated intensive student need. That's significant. A large portion of that is reimbursable. So there is Act 173 changed special education from a reimbursement model to a block grant model, but there's still an element of it that is reimbursable, and it's something they call extraordinary expenses. So for any one student whose needs exceed 66,000 something, I don't remember, 66,609, 66,000 something. Anything over that is reimbursable at 95%. So we actually have, I think, 15 students that are projected to be outplaced. Their average sort of cost in terms of transportation and tuition is $146,000. So a big chunk of that is reimbursable at this extraordinary reimbursement of 95%. So while that's an increase in expenditures, there's an offsetting increase in revenue as well. And then this budget has a number of added positions in it. And I think this speaks to some of those SEL needs that I mentioned on a slide before. 2 administrators at Bristol. We're adding 4 support staff. 1 is at Bristol, 1 at Moncton, 2 at Beeman. An SEL interventionist at Bristol, that was ESSER funded before. 0.4 guidance is added in here. That was at Bristol specifically, that was ESSER funded. We've added some FTEs for a home to school liaison. And that's really focused primarily on Moncton, Robinson, Beeman. The other, Bristol has historically had that, but that was also ESSER funded before. There's a math interventionist at Bristol that was ESSER funded. We added an admin assistant in facilities, and added a social worker to keep us at 3 social workers. Those added positions in this budget equal a little over $800,000. And then we had been paying for support from the All Learners Network in math with ESSER. We had some math software that we paid for with ESSER and literacy software that we paid for with ESSER that are also all brought into this. And those costs, less some reductions we made in some other places in that same line, net out to an increase of almost 91,000. So those few groups of expenses tell the bulk of the story of the increase from current budget to next budget.
Patrick, on the $1 million anticipated need, that figure anticipates the 75,000 or so reimbursement for each of the 14 kids, or no?
No, so that's the total cost.
Okay, so.
And then we increased the revenue on the slide that we saw before to account for what we didn't expect for.
So that's a good
So
number.
that's just the expense side of it.
Okay.
So on the salary for it,
Mhm.
is that related to your position item? Or is that?
So the position.
Is that an expectation that salaries will need to go up more than? We're still in the last contract here for most of it.
Right, so the salaries there are assumptions built into that for support staff, and then we take the folks that we know are returning for next year, at least at this point, know are returning for next year, and use their actual salary for professional staff, because we have a contract that goes into next year, so that's more a real number.
Yeah.
But those salaries are for everyone except the positions that are added, so that way they're not double counted.
Okay.
And those, where you see that 816,000, that's the total compensation. So that's salaries and benefits and everything for those positions.
Yeah.
And those benefits are also not double counted in the health insurance line either, so. So I mentioned before, the 6 utility educational assistants are the only ESSER funded positions not in this budget. Those are not currently all filled. There's probably maybe around 3 of those positions currently filled, and all 3 of the educational assistants in those utility positions now would have a space to fill a vacant position going forward. So this budget also has, at this point in time, no anticipated rifts. Now, again, we may get something new from the state and we're way over budget and we have to change that, but at least given what we know right now, this would not necessitate any reductions in force.
So those 3 folks in the filled positions, you have some other place for them.
Right, so we'll have some vacancies in other educational assistant positions next year that are not the utility positions.
Nice.
Okay.
Might be working with an individual student or in a kindergarten classroom or something other than utility EA. So I talked on the other slide about some of the positions that are added in this coming budget. We've added some other positions in recent years that we've some of them have been ESSER funded that we've absorbed prior to the FY25 budget. And I wanted to just sort of acknowledge those as we think about the resources we're bringing to bear to support students. So we have in the last few years added 3 classroom teachers, 1 at Beeman, 1 at Bristol, 1 at Moncton. 2 of those were initially added with ESSER, the Bristol position and the Beeman position. You might recall last year we added 2 Moncton classrooms given the influx of students, and this budget keeps 1 of those added, but doesn't keep the other 1 that was added. So that's where that Moncton 1 comes from. This does add, in addition to the social worker that we're adding for FY25, we added a social worker in a couple of budgets ago as well. So we had, for a long time, we had 1 social worker pretty much exclusively working at Mount Abe. We then added 1 into the budget to get to 2, and then we added 1 for ESSER to 3. That last ESSER 1 is now being brought into the budget and keeps us at 3, supposing we can sustain that as we get deeper into the budget season. We added a literacy interventionist at Mount Abe with ESSER that was brought into the budget, I think for this year. We added a school counselor at Mount Abe into the budget, a math interventionist at Mount Abe that was initially ESSER funded, 2 educational assistants at Bristol that were ESSER funded, a data manager that helps with that day-to-day that Katrina was talking about tremendously. Also does lots and lots of different required state reports, et cetera. And we've added a director of safety. So to kind of summarize, we had funded at one point in time, or at different points in time, 17.7 FTEs using ESSER. 7 of those I mentioned, actually, I take that back. I said 7 are not funded. That was true at one point. It's now 6 are not funded. So 11.7 FTEs are now in the budget. In addition to the 12 other positions that we added. So that's actually now 23. So 21.7 of 23.7 FTEs that we've added in recent years are directly related to meeting student needs. And that's just new. That is on top of everything we had prior. So lots and lots of investment in working to meet student need.
Patrick, maybe you said this already, but so for the 17 ESSER funded positions, were those all new, or were they some that you funded with ESSER while we had the ESSER and now are funding back into the budget?
So they didn't exist, none of those existed prior to ESSER. Like maybe in the first wave of ESSER, we funded a position using those ESSER dollars. And then recognizing that's something that we likely want to sustain going forward, rather than continue to pay for it with ESSER, when we saw the opportunity, we'd build it into the budget. That could be some other position we chose not to fill and instead use that to fund that previously ESSER funded position. So it's been, I would say over the FY25, FY24, FY23 budgets, each have had a little bit of sort of chipping away at positions that at one point in time have been ESSER funded. And all total in those 3 years, at different points in time, we've funded 17.7 ESSER positions.
New positions.
Yep.
That were not previously in the district.
Correct. And 11.7 of them, correcting that, are still in this budget that you see. In addition to 12 other positions that weren't initially ESSER funded that are also added.
It's amazing that we can sustain that many. That is
We'll
good-
talk about
good budgeting.
sustainability in a couple of slides. We'll see if we still feel that way.
The Mausd reduction support. That's a given. I feel like I may be approached on that. I'm not sure why, and what's gonna happen to the classrooms? Will they get larger or how?
So it depends on the configuration. So yes, classrooms would be larger with one less teacher than they would be with one more teacher. But if we go back to this slide, these figures are without that classroom teacher.
Okay.
So when you look at it across schools,
So they're still good.
yeah.
Okay.
Now, the calculation for this is anticipated number of students in K2 divided by anticipated number of teachers at K2. And that's giving us what this average K2 class size would be at each of these schools. Within that school, depending on philosophies, where bubbles of kids are, there are a number of different factors that go into the actual class configuration. So it's not to say that there couldn't be a class that's 22, even though the average is 15.5.
Okay, so, yeah. There would be a loss.
Patrick, is there any worry about, well, maybe not worry, but seems like there's a potential for another really big kindergarten class. I'm just thinking about all the numbers of 4-year-olds that I know and Moncton. So is there, like, that's tracked pretty closely, right? So we kind of
Yep.
know what's coming.
I think we've already gotten 3 updates this year so far on what the
Okay.
projections are for next year. Right now, at Moncton, it's sitting at 19 kindergartners, is what's projected. What's hard to project is how many do we think are going to move in that nobody has any clue about right now?
Right.
And when you're sitting, our staffing rules say that we don't want kindergartens over 20. When you're sitting right at 19, it's a little bit nerve wracking to know, like, we're awfully close to being over that 20. But when we recognize, like, the safe bet in one way would be to say, let's just budget for 2 kindergarten classrooms just in case we get 2 more. Well, that's $100,000 we might not need to spend.
Right.
If it stays at 19, or even maybe they lose 2 kids and it's actually 17. And now you've got a kindergarten of 8 and a kindergarten of 9, and you spend $100,000 to get that, when 17 would have been just fine. And so that's sort of the game that we're playing right now. So this does not assume 2 kindergartens a month. Right, I think that's where we were. So just for reference again, with this budget, in case someday it ever comes back, hard to know, the spending threshold, this would have us over the spending threshold by almost 1.5 million. And that's after taking out capital and debt expenditures, that would likely come off of whatever that penalty threshold would be. And more or less, the notes at the bottom say, this is our best guess and this all could change. So not putting a whole lot of stock in that, but it's something I think it's wise to keep an eye on. So projected tax rates. What you see at the top is the actual tax rate for the current year, FY24. And what you see in the red below, the projected 2025, if there was no cap, that is what this budget would project for a tax rate increase. That's significant. It's almost a 17% increase in the tax rate. And I'll show you historically what we've seen for tax rate changes to kind of put that in perspective. But it's big, I think, is the summary. And then below that, the $1.57 is a 5% cap. So that is, as long as we stay under 10% per pupil, the most we would see in the homestead tax rate is $1.57. And then we'll talk about that gap that
So
you're
what are the
bringing up,
bottom
Brad.
2 rows then?
So this is sort of what we control, right? This is directly related to our spending.
Oh, and then if you.
And then
add
you have the
CLA.
CLA in the different towns, which actually produces the property tax rates.
So the 1.574 would still go up.
1.574 is the most we would see on the homestead. And so basically, if you
that's the
take the
homestead
$1.74 times the CLA, that gets you the $2 and almost 15 cents
Yeah.
in Bristol.
Yeah.
That's if there's no cap, but with the cap, $1.57 gets you $1.94.
Okay. So it's significant either way.
Yes, I will quantify the
Less-
significance in other ways
Okay.
in a couple of slides.
And we're not shaking in our boots as bad as some other districts.
No, I know.
And this is
No, I know.
significant.
Yep.
Bailey?
Maybe I'm just not understanding this. So let's say we're great and everything's capped, but that's not the actual amount. So where's the rest of that money coming from? Like the state's gonna magically find a rainbow? Like what's the?
The yield is where that comes from. So the
Okay.
yield basically is the great equalizer, right? So when all these budgets come in, that's gonna tell the folks at the state how much money has to actually be raised to fund all these budgets that just got passed. And they adjust the yield to make it so that the tax rates generate enough money to cover all the budgets. So when you have a lot of districts that are spending more money than the 5% cap would suggest, but they're capped at 5%, they're gonna have to lower the yield even more to make up for that money that needs to be found.
Yeah, it's like Carlson syndrome.
Right. And we talked about it a little bit last time, that's that race to zero.
Yeah. Okay.
Because
That
when
makes sense.
you spend more than what you're actually going to be taxed for, it lowers the yield, which puts more communities under the 10%. I'm getting this right, which means more communities are now eligible for the 5% cap, which means they need to lower the yield again. And so it's this sort of step down that we're not quite sure exactly how that's going to play out at the state level.
The state's not quite sure how it's gonna play out.
They could do a cool little cartoon-like video though, like you sent that description from the AOE
Yeah.
and how to talk about it, but you don't even like Kumon math,
Yeah, it's
like
like-
try to remember, how do I do algebra? And they have these great, like,
Right.
I feel like that would make it so much easier to
Like the Sir Kent
understand.
Robinson kind of cartoons that
Uh-huh.
draw it all out. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, that one,
Maybe with district mascots.
right,
And then, oh, look, the eagle's lower than the
that's right, yeah,
mountain
Yeah.
lions.
well, yeah, then we're.
It is a bit
yeah.
mind-boggling, only in that if you didn't cap it, and for some reason they had to drop the yield, that would automatically raise the tax rate. So if everybody's gonna end up, well, not everybody, there's gonna be some winners in this formula. They're hoping that there are enough winners to balance the losers, so capping it at 5%.
Well, they're probably also trying to
drive
ease the
everybody.
pain of the folks that had the
Right.
significant impact of the weighting.
But the
study,
folks who
right?
can spend more, they're encouraging to spend more. Like that's the trick, right? So the communities that saw an increase in their taxing capacity, they want them to spend more to equalize opportunities for students. And then you have other districts who are losing tax capacity that are going to spend more than they're going to be taxed by. So you have a more and more scenario, which is going to have a significant impact on the yield, which is going to mean a significant impact on everybody's tax rate across the state.
It's an experiment.
But if, but
It's
if
an
it,
experiment.
but if it bumps everybody's tax rate up because the yield drops, how are they gonna cap people at 5%?
That is the question that I'm not sure there's an answer to yet.
So your tax increase is just coming from a different hand, really. what it
Well,
feels
they're
like.
saying, no matter what happens, you're capped at 5%. They can't come back later like they normally do and say, oh, the yield did this, and oh, by the way, your tax rate's now gonna be this.
Right?
They can't do that because they already said they're gonna cap it at 5%.
But what they are effectively doing is growing the cliff,
Mhm.
right?
Well,
If you think of it that way.
They're gonna run a deficit for some period of time before they have to make it up. Or they're gonna have to come up with that money somewhere else, one-time funds or something.
All right,
So we're speaking
Let's-
of cliff, we're getting
let's
close to
move.
our cliff.
move along.
So this is what those same figures sort of equate to in real money. If not for the cap, we'd be looking at about $300 per 100,000 of assessed value. So a $300,000 house, $900 increase in taxes. But with the cap, $92-ish, $92, $93 per 100,000. So it's a third the impact that we'd otherwise see.
And this is last year's CLA because we don't have a projected number for this year. And it's kind of a tough one. Nobody's really sticking their neck out to predict what it might do because we don't have, some communities have great volatility still coming out of COVID. Others are seeing it come back and contract a little.
But theoretically, like, we just got reassessed in Starksboro. So theoretically, the state would look upon that and say, okay, you're at one now.
Mhm.
So it's gonna be- that should be a wash.
You're at one now, but on a home value that's higher.
Right.
Right.
So it should.
Right.
The goal is for it to be a wash.
Yeah.
And at times it goes over 100. Lincoln was running 106 there for a while, where they were seeing the tax rate in the town less than the homestead rate.
Yep. So what we were just talking about was for about a third of the folks that pay based on property tax, we know about 2/3 of folks pay based on income sensitivity. And there's a whole range of income sensitivity levels. This is using the median income from 2021. And again, it's this budget would show with a 5% cap, a $100 increase, and without it, a 20% increase, which is $400, which would be significant. Important to note that right now, best information we have is the legislation did not speak to a cap on income sensitized taxes.
No. So you don't really know what
That-
that percentage is.
Well, 20% is what we'd be projecting with this budget. So that's significant for
Yes.
the folks that presumably need it the most. That's why the income sensitized language is there. It sounds like it might have been an oversight in the legislation, so it's possible there could be swift action taken in January when they come together to correct that. But as it stands now, it seems that's not in place. So these are the changes in the tax rate for the last few years, and then this projected FY25 tax rate. And there's been a lot of different things happening with the yield. There are a lot of factors that go into what makes these percent changes. But you can see we're often within a couple of percentage points of zero, and a couple of blips up or down, but nothing like what this 16.26% increase would be. When we look at this over time, this assumes, so this is the budget you're seeing for FY25. Rolling forward, it assumes our expenses increase by 4% annually. It assumes a 2% reduction in our long-term weighted ADM, which is that's the new pupil count. It assumes that our revenue stays flat, and it assumes that the yield stays the same for each of these years. So those are all big assumptions, but to try and at least get us in the ballpark or thinking out ahead. If we take advantage of this 5% cap for each of the next 5 years, over those 5 years, we'll be experiencing somewhere around a 25% increase in the tax rate from where we are now. But in actuality, it'll be 52% increase based on our spending. And then in FY30, when that cap is gone, we have that difference to make up. And that's the scary part. Quantifying that in a different way, this is the dollar equivalent. So in our current budget, FY25, the one we're building now, if we wanted to actually bring our spending down to what would in real life be a 5% increase, we would have to trim $3 million in expenses. Rolling that forward, if we do nothing until FY30, we're going to trim almost $7 million.
But as Brad was saying about the front, he was talking to, I mean, I think we're all in that situation,
Mhm.
right, statewide, and.
Well, not all.
Well,
There are some folks that were impacted relatively little in terms of the weighting formula. And then you have some folks that gained in taxing capacity who are not in this boat. They have different challenges. And then there are folks that are in the boat that we're in and worse than this, but in that same boat.
I guess my point is that there are a lot of places that are going to be really anxious about FY30, enough so that I would hope there'll be some advocacy and lobbying on the behalf of all of those districts.
Yes.
So that they're not gonna have that huge super cliff.
Yes. And so therein lies, like, this is one of the million ways a superintendent can look like a fool. So we have no, like that. I mean, how many clips have we talked about that something's come along
Way to own it.
and poof, like that clip that we've been forecasting forever based on the information we had is now gone.
Legislatively removed.
Yes.
Maybe this cliff goes away.
Not
but-
to be like Pollyanna, but
Well,
I mean,
you're-
it's not our own, we have company,
Yeah.
so much company
This
that,
is a wide swim lane.
Right.
yes, so.
I mean, you just gotta look back at the slide you had about what the spending threshold could have been this year.
Right.
That was the cliff we were looking at earlier.
Right.
that We never ran into because they removed the cliff.
Yeah, the cliff was removed temporarily, whether it comes back or not,
Who knows?
who knows?
Keeping their
They
options
replaced it
open.
with this.
Yeah, so there's a new cliff and maybe we'll have, hopefully not converging cliffs,
I
but
see Sarah's hand up. Join the party, Sarah.
I still think we have a massive problem over like buy-in about voting for something that's so big. So I like get the whole state side of it, but I really think that those increases are not likely to actually be sustainable. So I don't want to throw the more negative juice on it, but I think we really, really have to make some hard decisions.
Well, thank you for starting the negative juice, because I was going to add something similar. When we think about it from a state perspective, we are already a state that spends among the most of any state in the country per pupil. We're a state that is struggling to afford itself in a lot of different ways. It's hard to imagine that, although there's evidence to suggest that it's true, it's hard to imagine that we will continue to be allowed to spend pretty much whatever we want on education. And that whatever threat of consequence may be forthcoming will be dismissed at some point when you get really close to it. Yeah, and again, I may be wrong on that, but
there's a reason why we spend more than most other states. This is part of the culture. So it's hard to know which way it's going to go.
Yep.
Maybe to that end, you did like a really wonderful job of highlighting kind of where we're adding to the budget from 24 into 25. To stay under that 10%, are there ways that we might be able to summarize? Are there areas that you cut back in this 25 budget as compared to 24? Strategically to get us under the cap, but also that we could speak to maybe the public comment about sort of cost savings or sort of fiscal responsibility in some ways.
Sure.
Do we have that as sort of a foil to present, or at least something to present to the community of, here's why we need all these things based on your input, but here's also how we're trying to trim excess to avoid some of this potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't build that into the presentation for tonight, but we certainly can talk more explicitly about that in the future.
I think we need to have something.
Agree.
Regardless how you feel about it, here's some things we could do if everybody wants to show up with pitchforks. What are our options?
Yep, that's absolutely doable, and there are implications. Because we're small enough that when we start talking about here's where we would reduce if we were going to, it's going to, with some clarity, identify specific individuals in our organization. And that's always sort of risky in terms of, as we're hypothesizing and being theoretical, someone's job and livelihood is hanging in the balance. So
I wonder, I noticed where a lot of the increases are coming from, and a lot for SEL. And might it be worthwhile to do some education, for example, have teas or whatever? I know they work, have small groups go out and educate the community to kind of think about what's going on and why the decisions were made to present a budget of that size. Might be worth doing instead of just like throwing the numbers out there and hoping that people are gonna vote for it.
Well, we are planning on doing a public session on this, right?
So I guess to summarize, so for FY, because we're looking at a number of different layers here, for FY25, the target is under that 10% increase per pupil. Given what we know right now, which is absolutely subject to change, I'm confident we'll get under that target. We're less than 100,000 like that. We'll be able to find that between the combination of revenue tweaking and, dialing in even more precisely and looking at expenditures. I think we'll be able to get there.
Can I just ask Mike for some clarification? Were you also talking about just like thematically ways to look at, even if it's not next year's budget, but in general, like places where we're trying to conservatively address costs, and obviously staffing is the biggest one, but there are a lot of things in the budget, so I don't know. I just want to make sure.
Thematically that, and then, I had just sort of a direct thought, which was, it felt like the last budget we saw, which was a similar number, didn't have the ESSER positions.
Right.
But this one does. right? And so I guess if I were to then go talk to the community about what changed, certainly we added a bunch, but we ended up at the same point.
Yep.
So I don't know, even in this iteration, where that money came from.
Mhm. That's where my mind was going when you said that, was
Yeah.
sharing a little bit more about what adjustments did we make to be able to fit in these positions and land at pretty close to the same place.
But I also like the idea thematically, especially if we take a longer view, right, which I think the board even well before my time was doing, right, in terms of talking of consolidation and other ways of big cost savings. Those things probably shouldn't be dropped in terms of like options, right? Of if we're gonna be worried about this, what are the levers that we might have down the road to address that?
Mhm.
So it feels like both of those are useful to have an informed discussion with the community at large.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I think that's kind of what Herb was asking for as well. So yeah, I think you're spot on.
Yeah, and in terms of the buttons in the report, at least maybe acknowledge what those buckets were and why they either don't apply or what we might see as more realistic.
Yeah.
Outcome for those approaches. You know, just so that we can at least sort of put that aside at some point and say, hey, we're either going to go down this road or not.
One of those buckets is actually an agenda item tonight for discussion.
That's right.
So
I was thinking this could be a good segue. What else do we have on this so we can?
I think this was the last slide here.
Okay.
The only other thing, and Floyd has some handouts, so you mentioned the Levinson. One of the things that Nate brought up was structuring budgets in a different way. So Floyd has handouts for you. One, it's this FY25 budget information organized. I can stop screen sharing so we can see faces again. Organized in the detail that we've seen in the past. And the other is the same information organized in the structure that Nate thought could be advantageous. What we'd be looking for from the board is a decision about which one of those would you like, because they're different enough that keeping both up to date as we get lots of new information is a big lift.
You have something you can share with people online?
That's what I
do. And also they're actually keep going.
If
But
you
you send
email
it to
me
me,
or
send it.
slide,
yeah,
Patrick, we
you
can
know
get
me,
it
then
to
I
the
can,
board.
We'll move it right now. Yeah.
While we're handing that out, I'm
So-
just curious if there's any movement. If anyone knows about, the SEL is huge, not just in schools, but in our whole community. And I'm wondering if there's any sort of look at funding differently for mental health within school buildings. If anybody's heard anything about like, CSAC or other mental health agencies looking at different ways to fund and like the work that we do, branching out, like how that kind of ties together. Because I feel like the schools are doing so much work when we have the kids the majority of the day. And that these are really great, safe places to be, but how do we sustain that financially? I don't know if that's going to go anywhere.
the only thing I can say to that, I haven't heard anything in terms of any real precise actions, but a year, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, we had an opportunity, as we often do, about once a year, the Champlain Valley Regional Superintendents meet with legislators in Champlain Valley. And just sort of talk about issues in education, et cetera. And I think 2 consecutive years are one of our greatest emphasis was we need the state to help our partners so that they have the resources. So when we call for help, they're able to respond. Because right now, far too often we reach out for help and the response is we'd love to, but and some of that's a funding issue, but some of that's the staffing challenges everybody's experiencing. They're understaffed and don't have the resources to share, but if that, and so that was sort of like, again, of all the things we could be advocating for, we didn't advocate for direct support to the schools. It was help the people that help us, which is more than school support. That's community support, which is really what's needed.
Before we look at this, I'm not sure what you were thinking, Floyd and Patrick, but I'm just wondering if it makes sense. It's a lot to absorb in this moment, and so I don't know how much feedback we could give right now, but if
Yes.
you want to just like share some highlights and then we can look at it and I don't know what the timeline is for if we were going to use it, if it's something that we can come back if
This is more the public facing document that would be used at the annual meeting, and it is something that
Okay.
the board has asked to see earlier. And so that part of this is getting you the information in that way earlier.
Yep.
But part of this is also in anticipation of the annual meeting and sort of
Okay.
deciding which of these formats do you think is going to serve that purpose best.
Okay, so we don't need to decide on which format to use until the annual meeting.
So this is Levinson.
Yeah, so the yellow is the Levinson organization. And then the other is the organization you've seen in the past. The only thing I'm noticing it doesn't have is the cover. So there's like a summary page that has all these even rolled up one more, kind of like the top part of the Levinson does. So if you look at the Levinson, the number 1 in this summary tab corresponds to the number 1 under the detailed section. So that top section is all the other sections kind of rolled up. Just like the summary page on this would be if that were here.
We'll send that summary page, link it so it goes into the minutes.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, if folks can look these over and then maybe at the next board meeting, there can be an action item to decide which of these is going to best serve the need.
I know it's probably really not possible, but it would be so great if an action item could be to make it bigger. Like, would these glasses work? No, no, this.
You know, I'm thinking of my
Oy.
brother who taught me this, take a picture and then blow it up on your phone.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, I'll hold it way out here
But there'll be an electronic version that folks can look at as well.
and blow up. Oh, my gosh.
Floyd, on the classic format, on the left-hand side, basically those are the cost code categories that are on monthly.
I left the codes there purposefully, so that if you wanted to go look at anything in the budget that you get, is that what you're asking?
Well, just like our monthly financial report, those cost codes are categorized into these numbered categories. What's the next column over?
That would be drilling deeper into, let's say, if we're looking at textbooks in that first section, so 1100 means direct instruction, regular gen ed, and then the 640 would be textbooks. So there'll be a 640 in other areas, maybe not the 640.
610 is a good example.
610 would be a really good example. So you'll see 610 in most of these, whether it's a 1200, an 1100, a 1400.
It's just a subcode.
Yes.
Yeah. Function and object are sort of the terms that are used for those.
Yeah.
And then you can go even deeper than that.
Sure.
Okay, thank you so much for doing that. It's something we talked about for a while, so appreciate it. Anything else that folks want to ask? So we'll see this again.
We will.
Yep.
And again.
And again. Okay, next up, this is just a quick discussion item on community linkage and really just a reminder that the budget is the topic we're going to be engaging with the community around most immediately. But soon after that, because it will be up for a vote at town meeting day, that we'll also need to be thinking about engaging the community around the purchase of Munsell Avenue for the central office. And then something else that we we'll probably be talking with folks about is this new public comment process that the protocol, which we read tonight, and other components of ways people can participate in the work of the board. And we may also be talking in a more future oriented way about things like whether to move sixth grade elementary students to the middle school. So I just wanted to bring this up as a reminder that there are lots of opportunities for folks to participate in these discussions about what we're doing currently and what the direction of the board is in the future. And some of that work might generate in a particular committee, but be in partnership with the community engagement committee as we think about how best to, sometimes it's just information sharing, sometimes it's getting input and then sharing information, sometimes it's both. So just want to let people know that those things are on the horizon.
And when you're out getting your signatures, because you're coming back to us.
That's right. Yes.
Good
Like
plug.
you see, yes. Not everybody has responded to my
10
question,
open board seats,
but we have some folks who.
10,
said
10
yes.
out of the 13.
Yes, so. Okay, so the next item for discussion is the sixth grade study, and I was just doing a little bit of Google, looking on my drive at this summary of the Levinson report. And for folks that were not here when we were engaged with Nate Levinson and his group, I can share this summary. The report itself is also really great to read and lengthy and has lots of different components to it, but there were a series of options that were presented to address declining enrollment, but also, as we see with the budget now, just the increased cost and needs that we have in our schools. And so one of those options was to move sixth grade to Mount Abe, which would achieve many of the goals that were set out that would be achieved with consolidating elementary schools. And it's some of the other options we've already explored, like merging and consolidating schools. And so this was a pretty big one that we haven't really done much with. So we wanted to put it on the agenda and have a discussion about how, if and when we might want to move forward with that topic. Want to add anything to it?
The only other context I guess I would add is that Addison Northwest is making that move there. That'll happen next year. And Addison Central has made that move already. So just from a regional context, it's happening elsewhere.
And the difference between those two moves is that Addison Central had a middle school, a separate building, where Addison Northwest would have it with a high school, right in the same building.
Yep.
And it does that part of, if we were to choose to study this, part of that study would be looking at sort of models within Mount Abe. And so what Virgins is doing is creating sort of a middle school within the 712 building. And that's something we could explore as well.
We have two empty wings, if you will, right? From consolidating the two middle school groups, right? They're not using both
Well,
upstairs and downstairs, correct?
Space is a
Funny
fun
thing about
right?
space, there's likely no empty space in this building. Needs expand to fill whatever space is available. But that's not to say that there couldn't be a restructuring of what space is located where to carve out an area if that's what was desired.
Sarah, I saw your hand up. I don't know if you still have a comment or.
I'm actually not totally sure. Part of me, like, I think the discussion is really helpful. And then part of me is like, should we try to concentrate on the couple of things that we need to work with for this budget and then potentially say, okay, is it time for that conversation after we kind of get through this budget? I don't know. That's my own like gut feeling on timeline of what our capacity is to actually take it on. Well, I think we're going to have to do it. I just don't know if now is the best time to do it. Those are my thoughts.
I wonder if we might think about what, if anything, we might need to have a productive conversation after town meeting day, or, after January or after the new year. And I don't know if anything comes to mind for folks right now. And also, if it doesn't come to mind right now, that can be like an open, invitation to offer that so that we can plan a time to put it on the agenda, but have it be, supported by any information that you think or ways of constructing a conversation that you think would be helpful. Brad?
I kind of agree with Sarah. I'd be a little gun shy about it right now. It hasn't been that long since the merger undertaking, and I wonder whether it might be better now, obviously to focus on the current budget. And maybe look at some of the other covenants and recommendations first. I don't know. I mean, I'm the joke you've all heard about. How many Vermonters does it take to change a light bulb? And that's none, because they don't want to change it.
Haven't heard that one.
That's great.
I think I tend to agree with both of those sentiments, plus the fact that we have 2 guinea pigs that we can analyze after at least a year of data, maybe. If they say what they thought they were gonna say, what's the environment at the school that the grades were removed from, what kind of impact did that have on the elementary schools that no longer have a 6th grade?
Good point. Yeah.
If they're gonna dip their toe in that water ahead of us, no sense not learning from whatever result they produce. And if we don't need to necessarily plug that in for this year, I would think that would give us some time to see what kind of impact that has.
Sarah? Oh, sorry.
Rather than us supposing we know what impact that's going to have.
Sarah?
I was
You mean
just
it-
gonna say, in the meantime, we could also start with what information did they go and gather, and how did they go about doing it, and seeing what like all of their steps were, and try to be at least when the conversation's ready to start ahead of that, so that we have all, when you're asking what are we going to need, I feel like we should go look at what they needed to help make that decision, and look at the process that was undertaken.
I think that it might also be helpful to look at not Mansfield District, because they've had separate middle schools or 5th through 8th, but for many years, and to maybe see what they would change or what is going great there, because they have been more established. I know I won't be part of this conversation from this end of the table at that point, but I, as a mom of kids who would be in this mix, I would want to know about the financial pieces and comparing 2 choices of having 6th graders within this building with, so a 6th through 12th, or is there an option to have another building be purposed as a middle school where it's 5 through 8, 6 through 8, something within our district, and what would those costs and benefits be? Because I know there's a lot of parents when that phrase was first muttered, and myself included, were completely freaked out about their 6th grader being at this building with older kids, and the fact that they do share spaces, just because we don't have 2 cafeterias, we don't have 2 nurses, there's just things that they share, the gym, right? So that piece, I think, is going to take a lot more searching and a lot more community input. So I definitely agree to go slow, really look at what work other places are having, and see what, a lot more community will. The only people who are going to show up are going to show up, right? Like we've seen in the past, but more chances, I guess, than if we rush it.
You're reminding me that we have that thought exchange data that would be interesting to look at as well. Okay. Any other thoughts or feedback? Right now? All right, thank you. Okay, I don't think we have an update from the facilities committee. Is there anything? Kevin isn't here, or Kathy, Justin on that committee, right? Anything? Did you guys-
Patrick and I having.
Oh, right, because Kevin was away.
We had a great
That's
chat.
right.
Catch up like old buddies.
Excellent. So it wasn't a committee meeting, but you had a nice conversation. Great. Finance committee, we see a separate cover was the minutes.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention on the minutes for that there didn't seem to be over in the results of the meeting. Like, was the agenda approved? It didn't say. And then under the discussion item, it wasn't sure if that was an action item or a discussion item. And then there wasn't any follow-up for that either. In terms of the result of the discussion or the action. So there was a little bit hard to follow what actually happened in the meeting.
But we can be better about the formality of those minutes. As you can see, those were essentially notes that were taken then, like in the moment, and then I forgot about it. And then that's what you got. So we can dot our i's and cross t's going forward, for sure.
There is something I see here about the pay orders. So it sounds like you're making a recommendation. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we were gonna do that, weren't we? Yeah, so I thought we should bring it formally, I suppose, for another meeting, but we did briefly discuss the pay orders. And sort of, at least from our mind, the absurdity of having the entire board sign off on all of these. And so we made the consensus was that it would make sense for the finance subcommittee to sign off on those and then bring those to the board for their full approval. So at least that was our initial impression on a way we could streamline some of that work. Given that there's so many pieces in place, as Floyd outlined last meeting, before that information even gets to us, it did make sense for everybody to sign, at least in our opinion. So yes, we should, I'll talk to Krista about how we might bring that.
I mean, I
more
think
formally.
it probably would need to be does that need to be an action item on our next agenda to formally approve that, or is that just something we can do?
It would be cleaner if it were that way. Then it's
Okay.
documented in the record that that was the board decision and.
Okay.
Well,
So-
it should also be formally moved out of the committee.
Right.
So that's when I was reading it, I'm like,
I see.
oh, did you formally move this out? I couldn't tell whether you moved it out or not. So just like here, you'd want to make it an action item, vote on it, and then move it.
So what you can do is do that at your December meeting, and then we can put it on the agenda because we'll have time to warn it.
Perfect.
But at the same time, you might talk about how to execute that. Like, what does your internal review look like? And what are you reviewing, and how does that change administratively what you have to do to bring it to us in the end? You know, just to get that
Sure.
flushed out a little bit before we see the final recommendation. It may not be a big deal, but I'm just thinking that it's a change for you folks in terms of how it's all handled.
Yep.
Alright, but yeah, makes good sense. And then the only other small one from us is, maybe not that small, is where you have a meeting scheduled for the 29th, for some community engagement on the budget. Really, the hope is that it's a very top level discussion, and we're still kind of working through presentation and some details there, but there's some engagement in that front.
And we want to make sure we get that warned as well.
Yeah.
Even then, we'll just have to think, is it gonna be warned as a finance committee meeting? Or as a board meeting?
So if it's on the 29th, oh. And then we have the holiday. Oh, could it be warned on Monday the 27th?
Yeah, 48 hours is the
Okay.
minimum required for a regular meeting.
Okay. So Jennifer can do that first thing Monday. Can you get an agenda to her by then?
Oh, for sure.
Great.
Can I just clarify something about it?
Please.
If it's warned as a board meeting, does that mean that 2/3 of the board has to be there? And if
If
it's
you warn
warned
it
as
as
a
a
committee meeting? Sorry?
you would need to have a quorum for it to be a meeting. And if there's no actions, it could also be sort of advertised as an informational session.
Okay.
Whether you warn it as a meeting, I mean, presumably you're not taking action at it. It's for sure if there was action, you need to warn it as a meeting. In the absence of action, it could be more of an informational session.
Is that the same thing for a committee? Like, just do two of us have to be there to have any?
In order for it to be an official
informational session?
meeting, two people from the finance committee, 2 of the 3 would have to be there for it to be an official meeting.
I think.
But if it was
sounds
called
like-
an informational meeting, it wouldn't have to have that?
Oh, I think I think the issue is actually the other way around. I think you want to warn it for both eventualities in case a quorum shows up. Because if a quorum shows up, there has to be a meeting and it has to be warned. But if a quorum doesn't show up, it can just be an informational session. So,
no harm done.
so I think you want to just warn them in case people show up. You don't have to do anything at the meeting. You don't have to take action or do anything there. But you don't want to have it be a public meeting of the body because we showed up and then
But if,
if there's no planned action, maybe it
right, but
doesn't
also
matter,
can't
but-
we just, we can be somewhere all together if we're not. I mean,
As long as
we
you're not
can't,
conducting board
right?
business, I
Otherwise, who
think that's
knows?
the great.
What if I had a Christmas party and y'all showed up?
No, I know.
You better
Well, I
warn
didn't
it.
warn
But
this.
part of this thing is Q&A and potentially
so I-
people sharing their opinions and
Right, right. So if you're going,
we're discussing board business. It's not like we're not.
I do, it does feel okay though, like if it's warned as a finance subcommittee and you have a quorum of the subcommittee and you're conducting subcommittee business and other members of the board are present as well, like that feels safe. It's a public meeting, it's been warned.
Let's just do
it's-
it that way.
Right, so
I mean, you're gonna be there, I'm gonna be there.
Deal.
Nobody gets it.
do you need any other support for the?
I think the information you sent sort of in general about community engagement should be fine, and then I'll
Okay,
just
great.
follow up with Jennifer and sort of with the agenda.
you can email Jennifer, Katrina and I.
Yeah.
Jennifer's out,
I
I'm gonna
think
be out next week
Trisha might be able to help us on
and
Monday.
Trisha's in and out.
Oh, it's Monday you're shooting for?
I mean, I can send it tomorrow. It doesn't matter to me.
I think we can have.
Whenever it's ready, if you send it, then between us, we'll figure out who's gonna do what.
Okay.
And I think we need some help on the PowerPoint, the presentation itself, right? Some just technical support to.
Oh, I see. Well, we'll just, yeah, because we'll be setting this up in here, is what you're
No,
saying.
I'm talking about the presentation.
Are you thinking about distributing that with the warning? Or? Because so the warning will have to get out on Monday
Yes.
in order to be warned in time for a meeting on Wednesday.
I guess
Certainly.
I'm not sure.
Be helpful.
What are you thinking, like, in terms of refining the content of the?
No, just having someone who can, I'm not sure if we haven't had a presentation like the one that Patrick presented tonight.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of that would use, but not necessarily all of it.
We've been we worked on it last meeting and then Mike has worked on it since then, but we were gonna meet also on Monday to review it as a finance committee. So we need another meeting also scheduled, remember, Mike?
Sent that to her as well.
And we'll have to get that warned as well.
Yeah, so do them
That
at the
could be a
same time. That one was
could be
gonna
a-
be, I thought we had settled on it being more of a Zoom thing so we could have a work session to get it cleaned up. But I thought that was our intention.
And that will, so that probably falls under the category of a special meeting since it's kind of off schedule, et cetera. So that needs 24 hours notice of a warning. Which means,
Can we submit those tomorrow?
yeah,
The other
we'll just have to figure that out.
piece is we need to create a blurb and just push it out. So we need the help of our fellow board mates to at least say we're doing this.
So we're trying to get the word out to the public.
If you, yeah, and what, if
Or
you
keep
send,
a-
if
or a
you can
special presentation
send
on the
something, it
website.
goes, it could get, we could all post to our towns. Pretty easily.
Can I also just follow up on the Steve comment from just about the signing the documents? Is that okay? I can't hear anything.
Yes. Can
Okay.
you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay.
I think we were looking at it the same way that we just sign it normally, and that the protocol, we weren't gonna have to do a bigger dive because we felt secure with what was already happening. So I think we were just saying we would just switch the procedure. I think it's the word procedure to being that the finance committee would deal with the signing of that on behalf of everybody else, because we feel comfortable with all of the other layers that are in place about signing, about the pay orders. So it's not about the financial report as much as it is the pay orders. Am I correct on that, Mike?
That's right.
Yeah, so I think maybe when you make a recommendation for the next meeting, you can just say it would be, I mean, it sounds like you're just suggesting removing all of the other names, so it would just be the folks on the finance committee, which seems like that would be probably easy. Okay. So, but we'll probably have one more to sign as a group before that gets implemented, so just keep in mind that we're getting there.
One question I have is, where in our documentation history did we agree to do it the way we're doing it? And do we need to change that somewhere? Because
That might be a protocol that does not exist.
I've not been able
Adding
to find.
to our.
Yeah,
Not been able
you're
to
just giving yourself
find-
another agenda item for your committee.
We need another protocol.
Well, that's what I'm saying. This is a
I
prime
remember the
example.
conversation with Don when, at one point, which was, this is how we'll
This
just
is how
keep
we've
doing
always
it.
done it.
Yes, but I don't know.
The only change was everyone used to like, I remember I was thinking about that on my way in when I had just
Yes.
one bag.
Yeah, we had to do
I used to
that.
have
Yeah.
like my bag and two other bags that I
Yeah.
crisscross over my shoulders and
Yeah.
like kind of pack mule in all these things, and everybody would sign everything and gather them all back mostly all the time and get them back. So we just did the same process, but electronic.
And
So
now
it's
you
still
don't
the
have to
same
go
way
to
we've
the
always done it, but
But there's nothing
I
that
forgot
says
about that.
Yeah.
what we agreed to do, or now we're going to change what we agreed to do, and we're gonna do it this way now.
We don't know, but we'll see if we can figure out if there is any kind of archival trail to that, or it was just a folklore passed down from the olden days. Okay.
We're just codifying the common law.
Yeah. Oh gosh, where's Brad? Brad Hall used to just say codify all the time.
That was his
Love
favorite
that
word.
word. Let's codify it. All right. That shows you how long I've been.
yeah.
Okay, so we're good? Awesome.
Great.
Thank you for for offering this opportunity for the community to connect about the budget. We have the Policy and Governance Committee, other than what we talked about, good. The Engagement Committee, you see what we've got there. I think we're good. Well, are we?
Do you wanna do public comment for this? I see
Yes.
that, yeah.
Yep, so we do have another public comment here, so there's nobody here, Adora is with us, but besides Adora, there aren't any other members of the public here. Anyone online that would like to offer a comment? Okay. Seeing none, what I think we'll do our evaluation, and then, go into executive session, and we will just be adjourning, so when we come out, so there won't be any action taken, so we can, stop the recording at that time. And then we also have the review work plan and additional agenda items. Everybody good with what we have coming up? Okay. Does anybody have the eval open?
Do,
Okay, Erin.
what is the level of engagement of all board members, high or low? High. Was the agenda followed? I said yes, except for the addition of an executive session. Does the chair effectively establish the agenda and materials for board, for distribution to the board? Yes. Yeah. Is the chair effective in fostering a professional culture regarding fair and open deliberation, full participation of all members, and ensuring the integrity of board process? I said yes, and then I added a comment of the public comment structure.
And very well. Like, yeah.
Other feedback for the chair.
Sorry, that's.
It's all
Yeah,
good.
I really appreciated that. Professional and.
No
Doesn't
comments.
fall under this, but thank you also to Adora for being here.
Yes, agreed.
Really
thanks,
appreciate
Adora.
that.
Very helpful.
Really appreciate
For having me.
No comments for the chair, but thank you, Bailey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last one.
Somewhere else over there.
Good.
No. We'll say that now. Suggestions for improving future.
Tacos.
I'm writing it.
Oh,
Because that's the last.
I know. It's right.
Tacos for Justin, that's it, it's now public record.
Change it from.
If I don't get elected in March, then I'll be like.
You can be on the run on the taco platform.
The new name, Justin Tacos Pearson.
Perfect. I love that.
Okay, so,
Did you clarify your next meeting, December 5th? Are you about to do
Bless you.
no, but thank you. So we have, thank you, Katrina. So our next meeting is December 5th, and from 6 to 7, we will have a curriculum and instruction update, but do you want to share a little bit more about what it will be?
I gave you a little sneak peek in last week's superintendent's report. We're gonna have Carly Epstein from the All Learners Network joining us. So you get a little bit of fun with math.
Awesome.
She's gonna put your word.
That's right.
So that is when we normally have our committees, so just plan to have your committee meetings start at 7.
Cool.
So
Um,
then so we'd all meet here.
And then go off to your, right. Okay, so we have a need. Do either of them require, the grievance requires determination? The grievance executive session requires determination.
Yeah. That premature public knowledge.
Okay, so we'll first do the grievance executive session, which is wrote down some title. Sorry, I need to open meeting. I'm just looking for the statute. Okay, so the grievance is under VSA 3-1. No, we'll do the,
Sorry.
that's okay. Yep, we'll do the motion first and then we'll stop the recording. So the grievance is VSA 313A1D. Before we can move to go into grievance under that statute, we need to determine whether the district would be at a disadvantage, which would be what would allow us to go into executive session under that statute. So essentially, where you have to first find if the premature general public knowledge would clearly place the body, public body or person involved at a substantial disadvantage. So if I could have a motion first for that finding. And then we will move to go in the statute. Was that clear?
Yeah. So I move that because of the grievance that public knowledge would put us at a disadvantage.
Okay, and a second?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, Steve, all those in favor of the need to go into executive session for the grievance, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? Okay, and then we need a motion to go in for the grievance, VSA 313A1D, and it will be the board, and we'll invite Patrick to join us. All those in, can I have a motion? Please.
So moved.
And a second?
Steve.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Okay, and then we will move into executive session for the appointment, employment, or evaluation of a public officer of employee. So this is the superintendent evaluation, and that statute is VSA 313A3. And I would accept a motion for that. Aaron, and a second?
Second.
Mike, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so we're going to stop the recording. We'll be adjourning when we come out with no other action taken.